So here's our second method to solving quadratics. In the last video we talked about solving with the square root method, but the square root method was a very specific type of quadratic. It had to have just x squared. It couldn't have x squared and an x. So in this video with solving quadratics, we're going to talk about our first method, which is completing the square. This is one of the only methods we've learned so far that works every single time. We will solve quadratics that are on ax squared plus bx plus c. So you'll see down here, this works for quadratics that are in what's called standard form. So the same form that we were factoring, a is the number in front of the x squared, b is the number in front of the x, and then c is the constant. The thing to remember is that with completing the square, you cannot have a number in front of the x squared. So it has to be, as it says right here, a has to equal 1. If you have a number, you have to first divide through by a, like we'll see in this example, and then go forward with these steps. These steps are the same exact steps from class. Those things are going to work every single time for completing the square. So you're going to move over c, find b divided by 2, b divided by 2, b being the number in front of the x, divided by 2, square it, add that thing to both sides. Because you are squaring that number, it will always be positive. Make sure when you put that in your calculator, you put parentheses around the number and then you square it. You're then going to write as a binomial squared. The binomial is the same exact number that you got in step 2, except it is the number before you square it. So as you can see, it's just b divided by 2. It's just b divided by 2. And that's what's gonna go right here. So if that's negative, it'll be x minus a number. If it's positive, x plus number. Step 5, take the square root of both sides. So once you get done with step 1, 2, 3, and 4, from there on out you're just solving. You have a squared, so to undo the square, you're going to square root both sides. Do not forget to do plus or minus. Please, please, please don't forget when you take the square root of both sides, you have to have plus or minus the square root of the number. And then the last thing you're going to do is just solve for x. So I'm only going to do one example in this video. The first thing that I notice is there's a number in front of the x squared. So I need to divide through by the 3 because for completing the square I have to have 1x squared. So I'm going to divide every single thing by 3. Those cancel, which is the goal. So I'll have x squared minus 12 divided by 3 gives me 4x. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4, and 0 divided by 3 gives me 0. So now that I have a 1 in front of the x squared, I can now go through and start completing the square. So, step 1. Step 1 says to get c to the other side. Well, here's c. So how do I undo minus 4? I add 4 to both sides. And so I have x squared minus 4x. Leave a blank, and that blank is because I want to fill stuff in once I complete the square. So I moved c over. Step 2 says working aside, find b divided by 2 squared. Well, here's b. Negative 4, so I've got negative 4 divided by 2 and squared. Those parentheses matter. Do what's inside first. Well, negative 4 divided by 2 gives me negative 2. And then I'm going to square it. Now, if you type this in your calculator, you have to put parentheses negative 2, close parentheses squared, because that says negative 2 times negative 2, which gives me positive 4. So step 3 says take that number you just got and add it to both sides. So step 3, take that number and add it to both sides. that number will always be positive. Now, step 4 says write it as a binomial squared. Well, we wrote up at the top that it is always x and then the number before I squared it, so minus 2. Not negative 4 over 2 because that simplifies, but it's always the number before it was squared. So negative 2, and then on this side, I'm going to just add 4 plus 4 and give me 8. Step 5, you're now working on solving. Well, the way that I undo squared is I'm going to square root both sides. So square root, don't forget your plus or minus. So the squared and the square root cancel, so on the left hand side I have just x minus 2, and then on the right hand side plus or minus the square root of 8. 8 simplifies, the square root of 8 simplifies, so I'm going to do my factor tree. I have a 2 coming out and a 2 left behind. And now lastly, step 6 says to solve for x, so to get x by itself I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I'll have x equals 2 plus or minus 2 square root 2. So I want to write the bottom 2 first because I want that plus or minus to be in the middle. So I'll have 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Now in Hawks, it doesn't have a plus or minus button, so you'll have to have 2 plus 2 square root of 2 and 2 minus 2 square root of 2. So there is how you complete the square when there is a number in front of x squared.